Wang, Ballad of a Luoyang Girl. The Luoyang girl lives across my lane. Her beautiful face looks barely 15. Her husband's dappled horse has a jade bridle. Maids bring her morsels of carp on golden plates. Her painted hall looks out on a crimson tower. Red peaches and green willows hang beside the eaves. Behind thin blinds, she leaves in a carriage of 7 fragrant woods. Precious fans welcome her back to 9 flowered bed curtains. Her husband is rich, but young and frivolous. His pride and extravagance surpass even Shichong. He dotes on his mistress, teaches her to dance, but doesn't hesitate to give gifts of coral to others. Not till dawn enters spring windows is the 9-fold lamp blown out. From each wick the embers fly like flowers. Absorbed in pleasure, she has no time for singing. Her makeup perfect, she sits quietly amid clouds of perfume. In the town, their friends are all the elegant and refined. Day and night they socialize among the smartest families. Who notices or pities the young and lovely girl from Yue, from a poor family, washing silk at the riverside? So here we get yet another of the heptasyllabic ballads. Ballad of a Luoyang Girl seems to be the story of a beautiful, young, and rich lady, and it's a poem that depicts this luxurious life and the pleasures that accompany this beautiful, young, rich woman who becomes herself an object of the male gaze, of male desire. In this poem, she is like the ultimate object of desire for any Confucian scholar official. So this poem has, a slightly, we could say, a slightly erotic component. This is a poem by Wang, and it feels weird as a poem by Wang. As you will remember, Wang is one of the best represented poets in this anthology and one of the greatest of the Chinese poets. His forte was in nature poetry, deeply infused with Buddhist ideas. So it was a nature that served as for illumination, for achieving an epiphany of a world without subjects, without individuals, breaking the limitations of reincarnation and of living, a pure nature that was at the same time an illusion and the deep reality that goes beyond all illusions. So Wang typically is best appreciated or more or recognized for this sort of poetry. This is a completely different work. In fact, the notes to this poem say that this is probably one of his earliest, if not his earliest poems. Wang was from a rich family. That was one of the reasons, besides personal merit, why he rose to high positions of office. And so he was a part of this rich demimonde, of this upper class aristocratic society of the town. And this included living next door to beautiful ladies married to other noblemen, and their appreciation and the desire felt by a young Wang for a lovely lady. So, as I said, the poem is basically a description of this enchanted life of privilege and luxury that this Luoyang girl lives next door. Because this is a ballad, this is a joyful ballad, we may imagine that it is inspired on a poem that was on the same subject matter or on a very similar subject matter about a rich Luoyang girl. Luoyang was the eastern capital and had been the eastern capital in previous imperial ages, so a place of opulence. even though in this poem we don't necessarily know if the poem is located in Luoyang. It could, even though the protagonist is a Luoyang girl, it could perfectly be taking place in the other capital as well, in Chang'an. Okay, the poem is divided into a few stanzas, and 5 stanzas. There isn't that much of a progress in it. Basically, most of the stanzas seem to be describing this golden life of this Luoyang girl and her rich husband. You could say the first stanza is an introduction, the next three continue describing the luxuries and the pleasures, and the last stanza, which is the more philosophical, is the only one that seems to move the poem in a more philosophically and Confucian-like critical appreciation of the poem. There are elements of criticism at this rich demimonde throughout the poem, which we will comment about when we talk about the stanzas. Excessive pleasure, excessive expenditure, excessive extravagance and pride are not viewed as positive things in the Chinese tradition, even though from a practical point of view the aristocracy had no qualms about enjoying such a delightful and gilded life. But the poem plays a little bit with the contrast that a reader would experience, while at the same time envying and desiring this beautiful woman and this beautiful life, and taking a peep into a reserved world for privilege, a world and a woman that would have been hidden from the gaze of the commoners. And images of being hidden appear in the poem, of revealing and hiding the luxury and the beauty. Even though those images, are present in the poem, and the poem is, a banquet, a poetic banquet of luxury and opulence and beauty, there is, throughout, those slight pangs, those slight arrows being shot or stones being flung, that, point in the direction that this luxury is not good and extravagance is not good at all. Okay, then let's go stanza by stanza then. So the first stanza, as I said, presents this woman who is the focalizer of desire and of luxury in this poem. The Luoyang girl lives across my lane. Her beautiful face looks barely 15. Her husband's dappled horse has a jade bridle. Maids bring her morsels of carp on golden plates. So we're in an opulent neighborhood. The poetic persona who is speaking, this is interesting, also seems to live in the neighborhood. So it very clearly points towards Wang Wei's real world self. He was a rich guy. So this might be based on a personally subjective and real incident. Next door, there's this beautiful lady. She's young, quite young. She's gorgeous, and she's married to a rich man. And the luxuriousness of their life very quickly becomes apparent in the images that appear in the second couplet. Her husband has a horse, and the horse's bridle is made of jade, which is an extremely expensive, wildly expensive material. No commoner, not even a lot of rich men, would deck their horses with jade bridles, if this is not a hyperbole or an exaggeration. And maids bring her morsels of carp on golden plates. Carp was an expensive fish, and of course bringing it in golden plates emphasizes this extreme luxuriousness. The two most precious elements in Chinese society, gold and jade, appear abundantly from the first lines, from the first couplets of this poem, to represent, along with beauty, this woman and her world, and also to point slightly, ever so slightly in the direction of the objectification of beauty and of this woman. Second stanza, we continue to see a description of, not of the woman, she has just been declared to be beautiful, but of her surroundings. So her surroundings, which are an extension of the self in a way, are also beautiful, and her surroundings lock her up in a fairy tale world of luxury and opulence. At the same time, they hide her away from the more prosaic realities and from the gaze of the desiring and curious outside. Her painted hall looks out on a crimson tower. Red peaches and green willows hung beside the eaves. Behind thin blinds she leaves in a carriage of 7 fragrant woods. Precious fans welcome her back to 9 flowered bed curtains. So she has a beautiful hall, painted hall, so a colourful, luxurious place. Her painted hall looks out on a crimson tower, so I imagine it looks out. It means it has views of a beautiful crimson tower. Only the houses of the very rich would include towers, yeah, which were quite expensive. Her house is surrounded and her hall is surrounded by beautiful trees. But what's more important, when she leaves the house, she does so in a carriage, and the carriage is completely severed from the outside world by thin blinds. She can gaze out, but she can't be gazed in. And of course, in line with all the luxurious images, it's a carriage made of 7 fragrant woods. It's made of expensive, perfumed, tropical woods that have scent, that have perfume. And when she comes back, precious fans welcome her to the bed curtains. So even in her bedroom, she's enclosed. You know, beds at this time, the beds of the rich were enclosed with curtains, so they were completely closed off. And you have even fans to hide. So all objects for hiding, bed curtains, carriages, precious fans, they're all objects that play with showing and not showing. Yeah? This woman is like a precious bird, a pretty parrot in a gilded cage. She is the luxurious item reserved only for her husband. And about her husband, sorry, the next stanza is going to tell us a little bit. Her husband is rich, but young and frivolous. His pride and extravagance surpass even Shichong. He dotes on his mistress, teaches her to dance, but doesn't hesitate to give gifts of coral to others. So she's married to a very handsome young dandy. Now, this dandy is compared to Shichong. Shichong was an important figure from the Western Jin dynasty. This is at the end of the 3rd century. And he was, one of the gilded youth of that time, which was a relatively prosperous time for China. He was the son of an important officer, but he became rich by himself through quite dubious practices like robbing and murdering merchants in the province he went to rule. And he was an extravagant man, so he appeared in the histories as symbolizing the decadence and over-opulence of the Western Jin period. And some anecdotes are mentioned in the histories, like he was in competition with other members of the court, and if other persons of the court burned scented wood, he burnt candles for his fires. He covered the outside of his house with silk. And there's an anecdote about coral. So the emperor gave a 2-inch stick of coral to one of the aristocrats who was the rival of Shichong. Shichong went purposely to that aristocrat's house, broke the stick, and to compensate, gave even longer sticks, 3 to 4 inches long, of coral to that aristocrat, to show off. I'm richer than the emperor. I have lots of these sticks and even bigger than the one you have. So images of opulence, but there is implied criticism here because the Western Jin and Shichong were symbols of excessive extravagance. And in fact, he was, a very bad model to follow. He died, he was murdered, he was executed in a palace conspiracy after his court party was defeated and envious rivals slandered him. So he died sooner than he should have because of that extravagance. So there might be here an implicit criticism of the rich of the capitals and their extravagant lifestyles. Anyway, let's go on. So we have this context in which the husband dotes on his lovely wife. He instructs her and he lavishes riches on everyone, including gifts of coral, which is, a very clear reference to the Shichong imagery and anecdotes. Next stanza, all night long. Not till dawn enters spring windows is the 9-fold lump blown out. From each wick the embers fly like flowers. Absorbed in pleasure, she has no time for singing. Her makeup perfect, She sits quietly amid clouds of perfume. So we go back to the woman seen as an object of pleasure, as a center of pleasure. All night long they have been having fun. Candles have been burning, ninefold lamp, so a very big lamp with lots of candles, which would have been expensive, I imagine, and they would have been probably scented candles because of the clouds of perfume that I mentioned later. Although incense could also be being used in incense burners. So morning comes, the fires are extinguished, they fly away like flowers, the remains of each wick. Pleasure keeps on going. It went on all night, it keeps on going now. And the woman looks like a perfect object, a perfect work of art, perfect makeup, sitting quietly, surrounded by perfume. She is like a goddess, the goddess of love. Last stanza, and the last stanza takes us now out from the house, from the person to their social circle, and also introduces the criticism, the only clear element of social criticism that is present in the poem. In the town, their friends are all the elegant and refined. Day and night, they socialize among the smartest families. So this life that they have been leading and what was described in the previous stanza is just one out of many nights like this, of partying and of enjoying the pleasures of life. But who notices or pities the young and lovely girl from Jue, from a poor family, washing silk at the riverside? So the poem finally concludes with this, melancholy image, like not all beauties are created equal. This is a beautiful woman who enjoys this demimonde of opulence and beauty. There are other beautiful women, but coming from the lower social classes, they are forced to menial occupations, and of course, no aristocrat or member of the upper classes will appreciate her inherent beauty, will deign to lower his gaze and look at this woman who is washing clothes by the river. The image is significant, though. Remember, a washer from Jue is a woman we've already encountered in this anthology, the most beautiful Chinese woman of all history, Shishi, who had been used as a weapon, in a way, to corrupt the king of Wu, so that her native state of Jue would be able to take advantage of the rival king's occupation with pleasure and destroy his kingdom. So Shishi was a woman from Jue who started life as a washerwoman. So it's interesting. I'm not sure it's a clear reference to that poem in that episode, but it very well could be. Anyway, the conclusion would be the same nevertheless. There are beautiful women in office, in upper positions and in lower positions. Some get lucky and get to enjoy this life of luxury that everyone will envy and to become almost living works of art in themselves. Others don't. So, curious poem. As I said, unexpected for Wang Wei, but then again, we should avoid typecasting. I've already mentioned that a lot of the Chinese poets get typecast because of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 poems that they have been included in the anthologies, and so the poet such and such becomes a poet of flowers, or such and such a poet of nature, or such and such a poet of the frontier and the wars. And that's a gross simplification. Most of these poets wrote hundreds upon hundreds of poems, some even thousands. Most of them were lost with time. Some have been preserved. But anyway, those poems were about considerably different topics, and typecasting them based on conventions or on cultural interpretations of what their best poems are is, a simplification. Wang Wei was a Buddhist and a practicing Buddhist and a person who loved nature, but he was also a member of the aristocracy, and once we can easily imagine him as having been young and infatuated with beautiful neighboring wives. So, poems like this help us to expand our horizon, and for that reason alone, whatever their literary quality, they are of interest.